just heard the human voice. You thought you were listening to a violin. But in fact, you're hearing a human voice that is crying out in deepest despair. Now we can hear the other instrument that most closely mimics the human voice, the cello. It's a beautiful spring day. Here we are, May 3rd. It's fabulous weather outside. We should be celebrating spring, but instead we're going to be talking, ladies and gentlemen, about grief. So here's what's going on. This is the music of a man who was 31 years old. What could drive him to write music such as this? Well, his daughter died. 4 years old. So we're talking about Bedřich Smetana, and he is a Czech composer. He's considered a national hero. Even during his lifetime, he was fully embraced by his homeland. And at the age of 31, he was already having this stellar career, and he lost his daughter. Her name was Bedřiška, which is a petite and feminine form of Bedřich, his name. And they had this delightful, wondrous relationship. She was precocious. She was already playing the piano. He was her teacher. They had this tremendous rapport and that special kind of relationship that daddies and daughters have. She was taken by scarlet fever, which was one of the leading causes of death in that part of Europe in the 19th century. So this is what's behind the tragedy now. What we're going to be hearing is a great piece of literature, but it's a literature that is an exploration in grief. Now, I've always understood that when we want to understand literature, that we need to liken it to ourselves. In fact, I've also understood that that's the mark of great literature. When you hear it, see it, observe it, you see your own self in the construction. And you think, oh yes, that's how I felt. That's how I would feel. That's how I would behave in that situation. So we're going to do that. This is my daughter. She's actually in the audience tonight. And I'll just never forget this moment. It's frozen in time. The little feet, the book that she always read, the curlers in her hair. This was my daughter when she was about 4 years old, the same age as little Bedřiška. Here she is a little older. I just can't stand it that she grew up. I can't stand it. It's not me. All of us. Robin has a delightful daughter. Michelle has 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters. Here's another daughter. This is my other daughter. And here's how dads feel about their daughters. There's this special relationship between daddies and daughters. I think we all understand that. I think of this moment in time, and I just wish that could be frozen forever. I curse ruthless mortality. I curse the passing of time. I loathe her for growing up. And I think to myself, what would it be like had one of these daughters been taken from me? The devastation would be unbearable, unspeakable, and that's what we're expressing this evening. Now, we really need to get ourselves into the heads of our 19th century predecessors. Sometimes we see these old photographs and we think, well, they didn't have lives. They weren't normal people. They didn't have laughter. They didn't have love. They didn't have the kinds of feelings we did because they lived their lives in sepia. Right? And so we just want you to understand that what we're talking about today are flesh and blood people that had the full range and depth of feeling that we feel. And they weren't quaint 17th, 18th century characters. They weren't saying, oh, look how clever, look how quaint we are in these old-fashioned clothes. They weren't saying that. By the way, the only reason these photographs always are so static like this, and the reason they can never smile is because the exposures took so long with the early cameras, right? And so they had to hold a pose for 30 seconds, a minute, 90 seconds. And so that's why they look so stiff and unlifelike, when in fact what we have to understand is that we're talking about this. We're talking about Smetana, who was fully human and had the full range of human emotion and was swept up in that special bond that daddies have with their daughters, and she was taken from him. No wonder he's writing music such as this. But then look what happens. Sweetness and nostalgia and longing. Nostalgia, longing, and reflection. So that's interesting. But now look what's going to happen. This galloping figure. There's a sense of resolution, a sense of resolve, a sense of the composer saying, well, somehow we have to face this new reality, and that's also going to happen. But then you're going to hear these broad gestures that just accelerate into mania. Can you play some of that mania, that place where we marked? Just do it. Yeah, right there. Just do it, Lord. Mm-hmm. Where you're doing the tremulant notes. Yep, there we go. Extremes of human emotion are happening, in this short space of time. What's actually happening here is that Smetana is behaving clinically. He is experiencing the 5 stages of grief. Now, perhaps you've done some reading or had experience yourself with these stages of grief, which were elucidated by the famous psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And so there are entire fields of study dedicated to understanding human emotion in cases of devastation and loss and grief. And we're not going to go into all of this tonight, but you should understand that this is a huge area of clinical inquiry, and people have mapped it and charted it and tried to understand the range of grief and how humans respond in these extreme situations. And so the most famous is the Kubler-Ross grief cycle. And we're just going to simplify it for you. Here it is, the 5 stages of grief. The first is shock, total shock, and that leads to denial. You just cannot believe that this has happened to you. And then the next stage is where you're just feeling the pain. You're wallowing in that pain. And then there's also associated feelings that creep in, such as guilt, such as blame, self-doubt, and recrimination, blaming yourself for what might have happened. And we know that Smetana did this. He's thinking, if only I could have prevented it. What could I have done if I had only protected her, if I'd only concealed her or shielded her from the dangers? And then comes anger, just anger. And it's also characterized as a phase of bargaining, where you're trying to figure out how this might have been different, or how it could be different if it's something that is ongoing. And then comes the stage that we call the depressive stage, and this is multifaceted, but it includes melancholy, and it includes nostalgia, and it includes grief, just downright depression. And anybody who's had experience with depression will tell you that this is a very deep and dark valley, and it's one of those areas, one of those contours of human behavior that is very difficult to reckon with, to grapple with, and to understand. And then finally, the psychological field has said comes this next stage, which is a sense of acceptance and resolve and purposefulness, that somehow life will never be the same, but we find a way nevertheless to move forward. So those are the 5 stages. Now we should also understand that they're not chronological, they're not sequential. Psychologists will explain that they're actually circular, and that these things are cycles that return, and not only that, they can mix up, they can jumble up. And so anybody who's experiencing these deep forms of grief will experience all of these stages, but might even experience them simultaneously or in rapid fire, and they will just continue to circle and circulate. And this seems to be what's happening in this first movement of Smetana's expression of grief. So now, we are going to play you the entire first movement. It's heavy. We're warning you. This is going to be about 12 minutes of very heavy stuff. But just understand, this is the human voice, and it's crying out in deepest emotion. thank you. Well, congratulations. You just made it through a whole bunch of music. That was a whole bunch. And we understand, we get it. It's heavy. It's very heavy. It's thick, it's dense, and it's layered, and it's some of it might even be hard to take. We understand that. And yet this is what you must understand, is that this is a composer in tremendous grief, and he's just trying to express it, and trying his best as he can to express it. Well, the rest of it, frankly, is smoother sailing. It's not all going to be like that, because remember, there's these different stages of grief. So now we come to the next stage. And the one that he's going to be expressing here in this movement is nostalgia and longing and reflection. And it takes the shape of a scherzo, because that's the convention. Remember, he's not writing a movie soundtrack here. He's actually writing in the sonata form. And so the first movement you heard was laid out in a very careful construction, following all of the rules of the sonata form. You might have noticed that. You heard everything. Everything you heard one time, you heard a second time, because that's how the sonata form works. It's laid out that way. Well, the next convention is that the middle movement is going to be highly contrasting, and it's supposed to be a scherzo. Scherzo is the Italian word for joke. And so the convention was the middle movement would change the mood, and it's supposed to lighten things up. And so here comes Smetana's scherzo. Well, the thing is, he's in grief. So this isn't going to be a perky, sprightly, elfin kind of a scherzo, such as you might have heard from Mendelssohn or somebody like that. What you're going to hear instead is a dolorous scherzo with this kind of a thing. It's because he's still writing in the minor key, and he's still in grief, but he's writing in a way that's nostalgic and reflective, and thinking about now his daughter in her childhood and the way that she would have been at play. And so it has these very playful figures. And then the convention is that it will be punctuated by two other episodes. So the scherzo formula was that there would be an A section, and that's this one. And then there will come a B section. And his B section is going to be filled with nostalgia and reminiscing and reflections. And here it's going to sound to you like a nursery, like some nursery rhymes and that kind of thing, but sung in a doleful way. And then we'll go back to the A section. Then will come the C section, and this we would like to suggest is some of the most profound, stirring, and moving music that you will ever encounter. It's not a scherzo anymore. What's happened is he's broken out into this doleful march. And it is marching into the next phase of his grief, which is resolve, right? Now he's trying to be resolved. And he is foreshadowing what he would later become as a composer. He became a national hero in his homeland, Czechoslovakia, as it was then known, because he was trying to bring nationalist, patriotic sentiment into the music that he composed. And one way he was doing it was using these stirring themes, such as this. Smetana invented this. He invented this. This is stirring music. These are... Remember, there's a link between your emotions and music, and what music can do. It can manipulate people, right? It can absolutely do that. In fact, you know this. You know this from you've heard music such as this. You've heard this. You've heard this very sequence. You've heard this in Les Miserables. Smetana was doing, what he invented, right? You know this. You know this? Do you remember this? It's red, the blood of angry men, black, the dark of ages past. Okay, well, what is the composer Les Mis doing? Using the sequences that Smetana himself invented, which are the tonic, and then you go to the relative minor, and then you go to the subdominant, and then you return to the tonic. So just remember, if you're trying to get men to rise up into war, that's what you do. It's the tonic, the relative minor, the subdominant, and then return to the tonic. That's how you send men marching into war. This is remember, this is serious stuff. When you're using these tools, they can affect human behavior, and so it's not only an expression of the human soul and psyche, but it can also be a tool that can shape and form and even manipulate human behavior. So isn't it interesting that in a scherzo now we're going to hear this amazing march break out, and you're going to see the strings playing with this kind of resolve and resolution and seriousness and ponderousness. You're going to see their bow hairs breaking. That's what you're going to be observing here. Okay, we're going to give you this scene, and we'll talk about it after we finish the scherzo movement. Well, he was a Czechoslovakian composer and considered a hero. And a lot of us think of Dvorak as the great composer who came out of Eastern Europe. He's more well known in the United States. He spent time in the United States, so everybody knows Dvorak. Fewer people know Smetana. Interestingly, though, in the Czech Republic, Smetana is the guy that they talk about. They don't know Dvorak. They don't think of him nearly in the same way that they think of Smetana, which I understand we pronounce incorrectly in the United States. It really should be Smetana. But everybody says Smetana. He is a hero because he was the first composer to give expression to the Czech idiom and to bring Czech culture, folklore, and society into the music that he was writing. And he did this in many ways. He would take the bohemian themes that he heard, the folk songs and the street music, and he would bring that into the concert hall, actually writing symphonies and chamber music around those things. And then he started writing operas. His most famous opera is The Bartered Bride. Maybe you've heard of it. It's the reason it's significant to people in the Czech Republic is because it's in their language. He's writing it in Czech. And that was the first time, because until then, operas are always in Italian or German. But now he's writing music that the Czech people could embrace. And then, in their ongoing quest for independence and statehood, he began to express those sentiments in his music, using the material that we were just adumbrating for you, those powerful sequences that can stir a soul to patriotism and into nationalism. So he did all of that, and this is why he's considered a hero. This might be the reason that he's most famous in the United States. What you're looking at is the Moldau River. So here's a piece of homework for you. If you've not heard the Moldau, his symphonic composition, then we would like you to go home and listen to it, because it's extraordinary. It's one of the most expressive and descriptive pieces that you'll ever hear a symphony put together. And he just depicts the Moldau, which is, of course, this river that meanders through the Bohemian countryside. Here it is at its source, and then here it is as it finally comes into Prague, the capital, and you can see that it's this majestic river. And so in the Moldau, the piece that he wrote, it starts with just these little trickles of water. It's as if you can hear the water dropping, drop by drop, from the tree branches as the snow melts in the spring, and then it just becomes progressively bigger as it becomes a small stream, and a creek, and then a stream, and then a river, and then this majestic body of water that stirs sentiment in the Czech Republic. So that's your homework. Go home and listen to a fabulous recording, and you'll see how amazingly descriptive he could be. This, by the way, is the Smetana Museum, and it is a major landmark in Prague, and it's right there, situated on the Moldau River. So these are some interesting things about Smetana. I'll tell you another interesting thing. He was deaf for the last 10 years of his life. Beethoven wasn't the only one, but he gets all the ink. Smetana also spent 10 years not hearing the music that he composed, and yet he remained prolific. He continued to write. So this, too, is interesting. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're the St. Michael Trio. Our mission is to bring music into your ears and to do it in a way that's interesting and accessible. And the thing that we really love is when we're finding first-timers, people that are maybe experiencing a composer for the first time or experiencing chamber music for the first time. When this happens, we feel like we have accomplished our mission. So thank you for helping us accomplish our mission. Thank you for being a part of the St. Michael Mob. We're going to continue bringing you chamber music of this sort, and we want to do it again and again and again. We hope you'll continue to join us. Now we're going to bring you the final movement of his exploration of grief. And so this is supposed to be a broad statement. And what you're going to hear is this galloping piece where he tries to find his resolve and tries to send himself and situate himself and center himself into a life where he feels like he has the wherewithal to carry onward. And that's what you're going to be experiencing. But it has a manic quality. And so you'll be interested to know that there are things happening such as this. We call it perpetual motion. In other words, what you're hearing is just notes in rapid fire. Yakada, 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 yakada. That's going to go on for pages. And if you want to know, it's nerve-wracking on the instrumentals. Very difficult to deliver perpetual motion like that. But he's doing this because, again, this is his statement. He's trying to find that wherewithal, and he's doing it with a sense of agitation and trying to find purpose. And then the movement will be punctuated, yet again, by moments of reflection and nostalgia. And you'll hear that. And in fact, you'll even hear earlier themes return as he waxes reflective and nostalgic about his daughter. Okay, then, once again, a march is going to break out. But this march is very slow, very long, extremely long arc, and you'll just have this amazing sense of drama about this. And then it will come to the time for finality, for there to be an end, for there to be a resolution. So how many people are hearing this piece of music for the very first time? Raise your hands. Oh, see, that's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. That's exactly what we were going for. That's what we want. So we are not going to tell you the ending. We're not going to spoil it for you. But we are going to set it up. You realize this is a contest. It's a contest between despair and resolution. Between death and his daughter, right? Between a life of despair and feeling forlorn and alone, or finding the means to carry on. So where will he finally end up? That's the question. Now you will find out.